Ji-woo sat in the outdoor classroom, her notebook open on her lap. The Galactic Institute of Advanced Studies was unlike anything she had ever seen back on Earth. The academy floated in neutral space, surrounded by stars that looked different from every angle. Students from dozens of alien species walked the corridors, spoke in strange languages, and studied together under the bright artificial sunlight. She was one of only 15 humans at the Institute this year. Earth had joined the galactic community just 3 years ago, and most species still saw humans as primitive newcomers. Some were curious about them. Others kept their distance, unsure what to make of these strange creatures from a small blue planet. Today's xenobiology class was being held outside near the training grounds. Their professor, a tall insect-like being with multiple arms, was explaining predator behavior. Ji-woo tried to focus on the lecture, but her attention kept drifting to the sounds coming from beyond the fence. Growls. Deep, rumbling sounds that made several students shift nervously in their seats. The Velkari training grounds were just 50 meters away. Ji-woo had heard about the Velkari but had never seen one up close. They came from a death world, a planet where everything wanted to kill everything else. The Velkari had survived by becoming the ultimate predators. Tai-min, sitting beside her, leaned over and whispered. His dark eyes were worried behind his glasses. "You should not look over there," he said quietly. "The Velkari do not like being watched during training. It makes them aggressive." Ji-woo nodded, but she was still curious. She had grown up in a family of veterinarians in Seoul. Her parents had taught her to read animal behavior, to understand body language and emotional states. She wondered if those skills worked on alien creatures too. The professor dismissed the class for a short break. Most students stayed in their seats, but Ji-woo stood up and stretched. Her legs were stiff from sitting. Without thinking much about it, she wandered toward the fence, drawn by curiosity. Through the gaps in the fence, she could see them. 3 Velkari cubs, each the size of a large earth horse. They looked like massive wolves with 6 legs and crystalline horns growing from their heads. Their fur was dark blue, almost black, and seemed to shimmer in the light. They moved with deadly grace even though they were still young. An adult Velkari stood watching them. He was enormous, at least 3 meters tall at the shoulder. His horns were longer and sharper than the cub, and his presence radiated authority. This had to be Instructor Vralthek, the famous Velkari trainer that everyone talked about. The cubs were practicing some kind of hunting exercise. They stalked mechanical targets that moved across the training ground, their movements coordinated and precise. But something seemed off to Ji-woo. The cubs' ears were flat against their heads. Their tails hung low. They completed the exercises, but there was no joy in their movements. They looked miserable. Ji-woo had seen that same body language in puppies back home when they were stressed or overwhelmed. These cubs were far from their home world, separated from their families, being pushed through rigorous training. They were lonely. One of the cubs suddenly broke formation. Its head turned sharply toward the fence, toward Ji-woo. For a moment, their eyes met. The cub's eyes were gold, bright, and intelligent. It tilted its head to the side, curiosity replacing the earlier stress. Instructor Vralthek barked a command in the Velkari language. The sound was harsh, full of authority, but the cub ignored him. It picked up a training sphere in its mouth and trotted toward the fence. Behind Ji-woo, she heard gasps from her classmates. Someone shouted for her to get back. Tai-min was calling her name, panic in his voice, but Ji-woo did not run. She watched the cub's body language carefully. Its ears were forward now, not flat. Its tail had lifted, wagging slightly. The way it held the sphere, the way it bounced on its front paws, she knew that behavior. This creature wanted to play. The cub reached the fence and dropped the sphere. It pushed its nose through the gap, making a soft chirping sound. Its golden eyes were fixed on Ji-woo, bright with hope. Ji-woo smiled. She bent down, picked up the sphere, and tossed it back over the fence. The effect was instant. The cub's entire body seemed to light up with joy. It bounded after the sphere, grabbed it, and brought it back. This time it somehow pushed the sphere under the fence. The other 2 cubs had stopped their exercises completely now, watching with intense interest. Ji-woo threw the sphere again. And again. Each time the cub brought it back, its movements becoming more playful, more energetic. Its tail wagged furiously. It made happy chirping and rumbling sounds that seemed completely at odds with its fearsome appearance. Soon, all 3 cubs had abandoned their training. They crowded around the fence, pushing and shoving each other to get Ji-woo's attention. One of them somehow squeezed through a gap in the fence and bounded toward her. The watching students screamed. Someone triggered an emergency alarm, but Jiwoo just laughed. The cub skidded to a stop in front of her, tail wagging so hard its entire back end moved with it. It dropped into a play bow, the same gesture dogs made when they wanted to play. Jiwoo reached out and scratched behind its crystalline horn. The cub leaned into her touch, making a sound like a purr crossed with a rumble. The other two cubs squeezed through the fence and joined them. Soon Jiwoo was surrounded by 3 massive predators, all competing for her attention. They were gentle despite their size, careful with their enormous paws and sharp claws. They seemed to understand instinctively that she was small and fragile. Jiwoo tossed the sphere, and all 3 cubs chased after it. They tumbled over each other, playing and wrestling. Their earlier misery was completely gone. They were just young creatures playing like youngsters everywhere, regardless of species. A shadow fell over Jiwoo. She looked up to see Instructor Vralthek standing at the fence. His massive form blocked out the sun. His expression was impossible to read, but his posture radiated displeasure. His lips pulled back, showing teeth as long as Jiwoo's fingers. Taemin had reached her side, slightly out of breath. He grabbed her arm. "We need to go," he said urgently. But Vralthek spoke first. His voice was deep, resonant, carrying the weight of authority. "What have you done to my cubs, human?" Jiwoo met his gaze steadily, though her heart was pounding. One of the cubs pressed against her leg protectively. "I played with them," she said simply. They wanted to play. Around them, students and staff were gathering, drawn by the alarm. Everyone stared at the impossible sight. A small human woman surrounded by 3 Velkari predator cubs who treated her like she was their mother. Vralthek's eyes narrowed. He barked another command in Velkari, sharp and final. The cubs' ears flattened. They looked at him, then at Jiwoo, clearly torn. He commanded them again, louder this time. The cubs did not move. They pressed closer to Jiwoo instead. For the first time in his long career, Instructor Vralthek's commands had been refused. And the refusal had come because his cubs had chosen a human over him. The implications of that moment would ripple through the entire galaxy. But right then, Jiwoo just smiled and scratched the nearest cub behind its horn, while the creature rumbled with contentment. Sometimes the most profound changes begin with the simplest actions. Sometimes all it takes is one person who sees past the surface to the lonely youngster underneath. Sometimes all it takes is a game of catch. The morning after the incident, Jiwoo walked through the institute's corridors with her head down. Everywhere she went, students stared and whispered. Some looked at her with admiration, others with fear, a few with obvious disapproval. The videos had spread across the entire academy network overnight. Jiwoo playing with 3 Velkari cubs while security teams rushed around in panic. The cubs refusing their instructor's commands. The shocked faces of students who thought they were watching someone's final moments. Taemin caught up with her near the lecture hall. He looked like he had not slept much. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I heard that Instructor Vralthek filed a formal complaint with the dean. The Velkari ambassador is involved now." Jiwoo felt her stomach twist with anxiety. She had not meant to cause trouble. She had just wanted to play with creatures that looked lonely. "I have a meeting with Dean Hyojin after class," she said quietly. "Maybe they will send me home." "They cannot do that," Taemin said, but he did not sound certain. "You did nothing wrong. The cubs came to you." They entered the lecture hall together. The room was large and circular, with seats arranged in rising tiers. Students from 20 different species were already present. The air smelled of different alien scents, some sweet, some sharp, some completely unfamiliar. Jiwoo found her usual seat near the middle. Several students nearby moved away from her. A tall reptilian student hissed something that her translator did not catch, but the tone was clearly unfriendly. The professor, a floating jellyfish-like being, began the lecture on predator-prey dynamics. Jiwoo tried to focus on the holographic displays showing hunting behaviors across different planets, but her mind kept wandering back to the cubs. Were they okay? Had Vralthek punished them for disobeying? 20 minutes into the lecture, there was a sound from the corridor outside. A rhythmic thumping like heavy paws on metal floors. Several students turned toward the door, their expressions changing from curiosity to alarm. The door burst open with tremendous force. 3 Velkari cubs bounded into the classroom. Chaos erupted instantly. Students screamed and scrambled over desks to get away. A small herbivorous student activated a personal shield with a high-pitched whine. Someone knocked over a desk, sending data pads clattering to the floor. The professor's translucent body flashed bright red in alarm, but the cubs ignored all of it. They moved through the classroom with single-minded determination, their golden eyes scanning the crowd. Their nostrils flared as they searched. They were looking for someone specific. One cub spotted Jiwoo and made a happy chirping sound. All three converged on her position immediately. Students dove out of their way, pressing themselves against the walls. Jiwoo stood up slowly, her hands raised to show she meant no threat. But the cubs did not need reassurance. They pressed against her from all sides, nearly knocking her over with their enthusiasm. Their tails wagged furiously. They made those rumbling purr sounds that seemed to vibrate through the floor. The largest cub pushed its head under her hand, demanding scratches. The smallest one tried to climb into her lap, forgetting that it weighed as much as she did. The third one simply pressed against her side, its eyes half closed in contentment. "Hey," Jiwoo said softly, stroking their crystalline horns. "You should not be here. You are going to get in trouble." The cubs did not care about trouble. They had found their person and nothing else mattered. Emergency alarms began blaring. Red lights flashed in the corridors. Through the classroom windows, Jiwoo could see security teams running toward their location. The professor tried to speak, but its voice was drowned out by the alarms. It gestured frantically at the door, probably telling everyone to evacuate. Then Instructor Vraltek arrived. He filled the entire doorway, his massive frame blocking out the light from the corridor. His fur bristled with anger. His crystalline horns caught the emergency lights, throwing red reflections across the walls. He looked at the cubs, then at Jiwoo, and his eyes narrowed dangerously. He spoke in Velkari, his voice deep and commanding. Even without understanding the words, everyone could hear the authority in his tone. This was not a request. This was an order from a superior to subordinates who had disgraced him. The cubs' ears flattened. They looked at Vraltek, and for a moment Jiwoo thought they might obey. But then the largest cub positioned itself between her and the instructor. The smallest one pressed against her legs. The third one made a low rumbling sound that was not quite a growl but was clearly a warning. They were protecting her. Vraltek's expression shifted from anger to something Jiwoo could not quite read. Shock, perhaps, or disbelief. He took a step forward and the cubs tensed, their protective stance becoming more pronounced. Taemin moved to Jiwoo's side, his face pale but determined. "She did not call them here," he said loudly, his voice shaking slightly. "They came on their own." Everyone saw it. Several students nodded in agreement, though they kept their distance. More figures appeared behind Vraltek. Security officers in their distinctive blue uniforms, medical staff with emergency equipment, and then Dean Hyojin pushed through the crowd. The dean was a middle-aged Korean woman with silver-streaked hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. She had been one of Earth's first diplomats to the galactic community. She took in the scene with one quick glance and held up her hand for silence. "Nobody move," she said calmly. "Instructor Vraltek, I suggest you step back." The cubs are clearly agitated. Vraltek's lips pulled back, showing his massive fangs. "They are my responsibility," he said in heavily accented standard. "My cubs, my authority. This human has corrupted them somehow." "I did not do anything," Jiwoo said quietly. "I just played with them." "Played," Vraltek repeated as if the word was foreign to him. "Velkari cubs do not play. They train. They learn discipline. They prepare for their duties as warriors and hunters. But they wanted to play," Jiwoo said more firmly now. She stroked the nearest cub's head. "Look at them. They are happier now than they were yesterday during training." It was true. The cub's body language was completely different from what Jiwoo had observed during their training session. Their ears were forward. Their tails wagged. Their eyes were bright with contentment rather than dull with stress. Dean Hyojin studied the cubs carefully. Then she looked at Vraltek. "We need to discuss this situation," she said. "But not here and not now. Class is dismissed. Everyone except Jiwoo, Instructor Vraltek, and the cubs, please leave calmly." The students did not need to be told twice. They filed out quickly, though many kept looking back at the strange scene. Taemin hesitated, but Jiwoo gave him a small nod. He left reluctantly. Soon only the dean, the instructor, Jiwoo, and the three cubs remained in the large classroom. The silence was heavy. Dean Hyojin sighed and rubbed her temples. Jiwoo, do you understand what you have done? She asked. I played catch with them, Jiwoo said simply. You have created a diplomatic incident, the dean said. The Velkari Dominion has very specific rules about how their young are raised. You have interfered with centuries of tradition, and somehow, impossibly, you have caused 3 Velkari cubs to bond with you instead of their designated handler. Jiwoo looked down at the cubs pressed against her. I am sorry, she said. I did not know. I just saw that they were sad and I wanted to help. Vraltek made a sound that might have been a bitter laugh. Sad, he said. She thinks they were sad, as if emotion has any place in warrior training. But even as he spoke, one of the cubs yawned widely, showing all its sharp teeth, and rested its head in Jiwoo's lap with absolute trust. The evidence was impossible to ignore. Something about this human had reached the cubs in a way that centuries of Velkari tradition had not, and nobody knew what to do about it. For 3 days, Jiwoo lived in a special quarantine room with the cubs. The academy's leadership had decided this was the safest solution, while they figured out what to do. The cubs refused to eat unless Jiwoo was present. They howled when she left the room, even for a few minutes. The room was large, designed for studying dangerous specimens, but it did not feel dangerous to Jiwoo. The cubs were gentle with her, always careful of their size and strength. They played fetch with training spheres. They napped in piles, always touching her somehow. They followed her everywhere like enormous deadly puppies. Taemin visited when he could, bringing her meals and news from outside. You are famous, he told her on the second day. The videos have spread to other systems. Humans everywhere are talking about you. Some are calling you a hero. Others think you are reckless, and what do you think? Jiwoo asked. Taemin looked at the cubs who were wrestling playfully in the corner. I think you did what felt right, he said. And somehow it worked. But Jiwoo, the Velkari Dominion, is demanding answers. They want to know how a prey species corrupted their cubs. Corrupted? Jiwoo frowned. I helped them. They were miserable. Try telling that to a species that has built its entire culture around being apex predators, Taemin said quietly. Scientists arrived daily to study the cubs. They took samples, ran scans, and filled pages with data. A behaviorist team set up cameras to record every interaction between Jiwoo and the cubs. Dr. Bora, a human xenobiologist, was particularly interested in the cubs' brain chemistry. On the 3rd day, she came to Jiwoo with her findings. This is remarkable, Dr. Bora said, showing Jiwoo a holographic display of complex molecules. The cubs are producing bonding hormones that Velkari normally only produce when interacting with their pack members. Their stress hormones have dropped significantly. By every measure, they are healthier and happier than they were under traditional training. So I helped them, Jiwoo said. You did more than that, Dr. Bora said. You triggered a response that the Velkari did not know was possible. They did not think their young could bond with other species. You proved them wrong. The doctor sat down on the floor beside Jiwoo. One of the cubs immediately investigated her, sniffing curiously. I have been researching Earth's history, Dr. Bora continued. Do you know how unique humans are in the galaxy? We are primitive, Jiwoo said. Everyone says so. Technologically, yes. But socially? You are extraordinary. Humans did not just survive on Earth. You partnered with dozens of other species. You domesticated wolves into dogs. You worked with horses, cats, birds, even insects. You formed genuine relationships with creatures completely different from you. Jiwoo had never thought about it that way. To her, having dogs and cats was normal. Every family she knew had pets. Most species in the galaxy do not do this, Dr. Bora explained. They see other species as resources, threats, or irrelevant. But humans? You see potential family. You evolved as persistence hunters who used cooperation as your primary survival tool. Not just cooperation with your own kind, but with other species too. She gestured at the cubs. You have an instinct for reading body language across species barriers. You recognize emotions and needs in creatures that do not even share your biochemistry. To you, these cubs were not terrifying predators. They were lonely children who needed comfort. And you gave it to them without thinking twice. One of the cubs climbed into Jiwoo's lap, which was becoming increasingly difficult as they grew larger each day. She scratched behind its crystalline horn absently. What will happen to them? Jiwoo asked quietly. The Velkari want them back, do they not? Dr. Bora's expression became serious. Instructor Vralthek has demanded they be returned immediately for reconditioning. He says they have been contaminated by improper bonding. The Velkari Dominion supports him. Reconditioning, Jiwoo repeated. The word sounded cold, clinical. What does that mean? I do not know exactly, but from what I understand of Velkari culture, it is not pleasant. They believe the cubs need to be retrained to ignore emotional attachments and focus solely on duty. The cub in Jiwoo's lap made a contented rumbling sound. Completely unaware of the discussion about its future, Jiwoo felt a protective surge rise in her chest. That is wrong, she said firmly. They are happy now. They are learning and growing. Why would anyone want to break that? Because it challenges everything the Velkari believe about themselves, Dr. Bora said. They pride themselves on being the perfect warriors. Emotional attachment is seen as weakness in their culture. If their cubs can bond with a human, it suggests their traditional methods might not be the only way. Or worse, might not even be the best way. That evening, Jiwoo could not sleep. She lay on her cot, surrounded by 3 sleeping cubs who generated enough heat to make the room uncomfortably warm. Their breathing was deep and steady, their bodies completely relaxed. She thought about her family back on Earth. Her parents would know what to do. They had always taught her that animals needed both discipline and love, structure and freedom. You could not train a creature through fear alone. Trust was earned, not demanded. Maybe that was true for all species, not just Earth animals. The next morning, Dean Hyojin summoned her to a private meeting. Jiwoo was escorted through the academy to an office she had never seen before. The cubs tried to follow, but security teams managed to distract them with fresh meat. The dean's office was elegant and simple. One wall was transparent, showing the stars beyond. Dean Hyojin sat behind a desk made of some alien wood, her expression unreadable. Sit, Jiwoo, she said. Jiwoo sat, her hands folded in her lap. I have been negotiating with the Velkari Dominion for 3 days, the dean said. They want the cubs returned immediately. They consider what happened to be a failure of our security and a violation of the agreement that allowed their young to train here. Jiwoo felt her heart sink. However, Dean Hyojin continued, I have also been reviewing all the scientific data. The cubs are thriving under your care in ways they did not under traditional training. This is documented fact, not opinion. So what happens now? Jiwoo asked. Now you are going to do something very difficult, the dean said. You are going to demonstrate your methods to Instructor Vralthek. You are going to show him that there might be another way to raise Velkari cubs. A way that produces warriors who are strong and capable but also emotionally healthy. He hates me, Jiwoo said. He is humiliated, the dean corrected. You challenged his authority without meaning to. You succeeded where centuries of his culture said you should fail. But he is also intelligent and dedicated to the cubs' welfare. If you can show him concrete results, he might listen. And if he does not? Dean Hyojin looked out at the stars. Then the cubs go back to the Dominion for reconditioning, and humanity loses an opportunity to prove what we can offer the galaxy. Our strength is not weapons or technology, Jiwoo. It is our ability to build bridges between different peoples. You have the chance to show that here. Jiwoo took a deep breath. When do I start? Tomorrow morning. I suggest you prepare carefully. You will only get one chance to change his mind. That night, Jiwoo stayed up late planning. She watched the cubs play, studying their movements and behaviors. She thought about what her parents had taught her about animal training. She considered everything she had learned about Velkari culture from Taimin and Dr. Bora. She had to find a way to show Vralthek that play and discipline were not opposites, that emotional bonds did not create weakness, that there was strength in gentleness. Tomorrow, she would have to teach a warrior culture something that seemed obvious to her but revolutionary to them. Tomorrow, she would show them that love and strength could exist together. Tomorrow, everything would change. The private training ground was empty except for Jiwoo, the 3 cubs, and Instructor Vralthek. Dean Hyojin watched from an observation platform above, along with several scientists and officials from both Earth and the Velkari Dominion. Jiwoo's hands were shaking slightly, but she kept them steady by petting the cubs. They sensed her nervousness and pressed close to her, offering comfort. Vralthek stood at the opposite end of the training ground, his massive form radiating disapproval. His crystalline horns caught the artificial sunlight, creating rainbow patterns on the ground. His eyes never left the cubs, watching them with an expression that mixed anger and something that might have been hurt. Dean Hyojin's voice came through the speakers. Jiwoo, You may begin whenever you are ready. Demonstrate how you work with the cubs. Jiwoo took a deep breath. She looked at Vralthek across the distance. Instructor Vralthek, may I ask what you were training the cubs to do yesterday? She asked, her voice carrying in the quiet space. He was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, his deep voice resonating. Coordinated hunting. They must learn to work as a pack, to track prey, to strike in perfect synchronization. That is important, Jiwoo agreed. May I show you my approach? He made a gesture that Jiwoo interpreted as permission. Jiwoo pulled out 3 training spheres from a bag she had prepared. The cubs immediately perked up, their attention focused on the spheres. She activated them, and they began to move on their own, rolling in different directions. Catch, she said simply to the cubs. All 3 cubs took off instantly, but instead of each chasing their own sphere, they coordinated naturally. The largest cub drove one sphere toward the smallest cub, who caught it. The middle cub circled around to block another sphere's escape route. Within seconds, all 3 spheres were captured. The cubs brought the spheres back to Jiwoo, tails wagging, waiting for her praise. Good job, she said warmly, scratching each one behind their horns. You worked together perfectly. She threw the spheres again, this time in a more complex pattern. Again, the cubs coordinated flawlessly, reading each other's movements, adjusting their strategies on the fly. It was the same skill Vralthek had been trying to teach them, but the cubs performed it with enthusiasm and precision. Jiwoo looked up at Vralthek. They are learning the same skills you were teaching, she called out, but they are learning them through play. When they are happy and secure, they learn faster. They try harder because they want to please, not because they fear punishment. Vralthek moved closer, his heavy steps shaking the ground slightly. Jiwoo forced herself not to step back. Play is for weak species, he said, but his voice lacked the conviction it had before. Valkyrie must be disciplined from youth. We come from a death world. Softness means death. But you are not on your death world anymore, Jiwoo said gently. These cubs will grow up in a galaxy with different challenges. They need to be strong, yes, but they also need to be able to form bonds, to trust others, to work with different species. Is that not why they are here at the Institute? Vralthek was silent. One of the cubs approached him cautiously, a training sphere in its mouth. It dropped the sphere at his feet and looked up at him with those bright golden eyes. The instructor stared down at the cub. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Vralthek picked up the sphere. The cub's tail started wagging hopefully. He threw the sphere and the cub bounded after it with pure joy. Something in Vralthek's expression shifted. He watched the cub return with the sphere, watched it drop into a play bow, tail wagging. He threw the sphere again. Jiwoo stepped closer, sensing an opening. On Earth we have a saying, you catch more flies with honey than vinegar. It means that kindness is often more effective than harshness. The cubs respect you, instructor. They would follow your commands even without fear. But they could do more than just follow. They could trust you. Vralthek threw the sphere one more time. When the cub brought it back, he reached down and very carefully touched its head. The cub leaned into his touch, making that rumbling purr sound. I was raised in the old ways, he said quietly. When I was a cub, we did not play. We trained from the moment we could walk. Those who showed weakness were culled from the pack. It was necessary. Our world gave us no choice. He looked at Jiwoo and she saw something in his eyes she had not expected. Pain. I lost 3 siblings before I reached my first year. He continued. They could not keep up with the training. They were removed. I learned not to form attachments. I learned that survival required hardness. I am sorry, Jiwoo said softly. That must have been terrible. It made me strong, Vralthek said, but the words sounded hollow. That is what I tell myself. That is what my culture tells me. All 3 cubs had gathered around him now, sensing something important was happening. They pressed against his legs, offering the same comfort they gave to Jiwoo. But perhaps, he said slowly, perhaps there is a different kind of strength, one I was never taught. Jiwoo smiled. Will you let me teach you? She asked. Not to replace your methods, but to add to them. To give the cubs both discipline and affection, both strength and emotional security. Vralthek looked at the cubs surrounding him, at their trusting eyes and wagging tails. He looked at Jiwoo, this small human who had somehow accomplished what he had thought impossible. Then he did something that shocked everyone watching. He knelt. In Valkyrie culture, kneeling was a gesture of profound respect, reserved for only the most honored individuals. It meant acknowledging someone as your teacher, your superior in a particular domain. I do not understand your ways, human, Vralthek said, but I cannot deny what I see. The cubs are thriving under your care. They are learning skills I tried to teach them, but faster and with more enthusiasm. If you would teach me your methods, I would learn. Above them, the observation platform erupted in shocked murmurs. Several Velkari officials looked outraged, but Dean Hyojin was smiling. Jiwoo offered her hand to help Vralthek stand. He looked at her hand for a moment, then carefully took it. His hand dwarfed hers, and he was gentle, aware of how easily he could hurt her. We will teach each other, Jiwoo said. You know things about Velkari nature that I never could. I know things about emotional bonding that your culture never explored. Together, we can give these cubs the best of both approaches. For the next hour, they worked together. Vralthek showed Jiwoo traditional Velkari training exercises. Jiwoo showed him how to turn those exercises into games, how to reward success with affection, how to read the cubs' emotional states and adjust accordingly. The cubs responded beautifully. They performed complex maneuvers with precision, but now their movements were fluid and confident rather than mechanical. They looked to both Jiwoo and Vralthek for guidance, accepting leadership from both. At one point, Vralthek actually laughed. It was a deep rumbling sound that startled everyone. Jiwoo realized she had never heard a Velkari laugh before. They are clever, he said, watching the cubs solve a puzzle he had set for them. I knew they were intelligent, but I never saw them use their intelligence with such creativity. They are not just following commands. They are thinking. That is what happens when they feel safe enough to try new things, Jiwoo explained. Fear makes you cautious. Security makes you brave. When the demonstration ended, the cubs were tired but happy. They sprawled on the ground, panting, their tails still wagging occasionally. They accepted affection from both Jiwoo and Vralthek, creating a pile of contentment. Dean Hyojin descended from the observation platform, along with the various officials. The Velkari delegates looked uncertain, clearly struggling with what they had witnessed. One of them, an older female with scars across her muzzle, approached Vralthek. Instructor, she said in Velkari, though Jiwoo's translator caught it. What you have done here today goes against all our traditions. Yes, Vralthek agreed. It does, but Ambassador Haewon, tell me honestly, have you ever seen cubs perform better than these three did today? Ambassador Haewon looked at the cubs, still piled together with Jiwoo sitting among them. Her expression was conflicted. No, she admitted quietly. I have not. Then perhaps, Vralthek said, it is time our traditions evolved. The ambassador was silent for a long moment. Then she did something unexpected. She approached Jiwoo and inclined her head in respect. Human Jiwoo, she said, you have shown us something we did not know we needed to see. I would like to learn more about your methods, for the sake of all Velkari cubs who might benefit from them. Jiwoo felt tears prick her eyes. This was more than she had hoped for. This was the beginning of real change. I would be honored, she said. And in that moment, with three contented cubs purring around her, with a former adversary becoming an ally, with a culture beginning to question centuries of tradition, Jiwoo understood something profound. Sometimes the greatest strength is not in refusing to change, but in being brave enough to grow. 6 months had passed since that day in the training ground. The Galactic Institute looked the same from the outside, but everything inside had changed. Jiwoo walked through the corridors with confidence now, no longer the nervous first-year student who kept her head down. The cubs followed her, though they were hardly cubs anymore. They had grown significantly, their shoulders now reaching her chest. Their crystalline horns had lengthened and sharpened. They moved with the deadly grace of their species, but their eyes remained warm when they looked at her. Behind them walked Instructor Vralthek. Over the past months, he had become more than just a colleague. He had become a friend. They had spent countless hours together, combining Velkari discipline with human bonding techniques, creating something entirely new. The results spoke for themselves. The cubs could perform every traditional Velkari skill with precision, but they could also work cooperatively with other species, something adult Velkari often struggled with. They were confident, well-adjusted, and remarkably intelligent. Today was important. Representatives from across the galaxy had come to observe the new training program that had emerged from that first game of catch. Timon caught up with them near the demonstration hall. He had been documenting everything for his thesis, which had already attracted attention from major xenopsychology journals. "Are you nervous?" he asked Jiwoo. "A little," she admitted, "but mostly excited. If this works, if we can show other species what is possible, then maybe you change the galaxy," Taemin finished, grinning. Just like a human, to think small. The demonstration hall was packed. Jiwoo recognized species she had only seen in textbooks. There were the crystalline Litharians, the gaseous nebulons in their containment suits, the massive Taurians, and of course many Velkari, including Ambassador Haewon Dean Hyojin, stood at the center of the hall, waiting for silence. 6 months ago, the dean began, a young human student played catch with 3 Velkari cubs. It seemed like a small thing at the time, a moment of kindness, but that moment has grown into something much larger. She gestured to Jiwoo and Vralthek. "What you will see today is the result of cooperation between species, a human and a Velkari, working together to raise the next generation. They have created a training method that honors Velkari strength, while embracing human emotional intelligence. The results have exceeded all expectations." Jiwoo and Vralthek moved to the center of the hall. The cubs followed, their movements synchronized and graceful. The audience leaned forward with interest. For the next hour, they demonstrated everything. The cubs performed complex hunting simulations, working together with perfect coordination. They solved puzzles that required both physical skill and creative thinking. They interacted gently with smaller species, showing restraint and awareness. But most importantly, they demonstrated emotional intelligence. When a small herbivorous student volunteer approached nervously, the cubs responded with gentle curiosity rather than predatory interest. They allowed themselves to be touched, remaining calm and friendly. One of the Velkari observers stood up. "This is impressive," he said. "But how do we know these cubs will maintain their warrior spirit? How do we know they have not been made soft?" Vralthek stepped forward. "An excellent question," he said. "Allow me to demonstrate." He activated a combat simulation, the most difficult level. Holographic opponents appeared from all directions. The cubs immediately shifted into battle mode. Their playful demeanor vanished, replaced by focused intensity. They moved like water, flowing around each other's positions, striking with precision and power. Their coordination was flawless. They anticipated threats, protected each other's flanks, and neutralized targets with efficiency that drew gasps from the Velkari observers. When the simulation ended, the cubs immediately returned to their gentle state. They looked to Jiwoo and Vralthek for approval, tails wagging slightly. "They know when to be warriors and when to be companions," Vralthek explained. "They are not soft. They are balanced. They have not lost their strength. They have gained wisdom." Ambassador Haewon stood up. "I have an announcement," she said. "The Velkari Dominion has reviewed all data from this program. We have decided to implement similar training methods across our territories. Instructor Vralthek and student Jiwoo will lead training programs for our handlers, teaching them these new techniques." The hall erupted in discussion. This was unprecedented. A warrior culture was changing its most fundamental practices based on the guidance of a species they had once dismissed as weak. But Ambassador Haewon was not finished. "Furthermore, we are establishing an exchange program. Young Velkari will come to Earth to learn from human-animal trainers and behaviorists. We have much to learn from a species that has perfected cross-species bonding over millennia." Jiwoo felt tears in her eyes. This was more than she had ever imagined. A simple game of catch had led to this. Other species began to speak up. The Litharians wanted to establish similar programs. The Nebulans asked questions about adapting the methods for their unique biology. Even species that had no young to raise expressed interest in learning human techniques for building bonds across cultural divides. Dr. Bora approached the center of the hall with data displays. "We have been studying humanity's unique abilities for months," she announced. "What we have discovered is remarkable. Humans possess extraordinary neurological adaptations for reading emotions and intentions across species. You evolved as persistence hunters who used social cohesion, not just within your species, but across species boundaries. You domesticated dozens of different animals, forming genuine partnerships with them." She brought up images of humans throughout history with their animal companions. Dogs, horses, cats, birds, even unlikely partners like dolphins and elephants. "Most species in the galaxy see others as threats, resources, or irrelevant," Dr. Bora continued. "But humans see potential family, potential friends. This makes you uniquely qualified as mediators and bridge builders in our galactic community. Dean Hyojin smiled. Based on these findings, the Galactic Institute is establishing a new department, cross-species social dynamics. Jiwoo will serve as a teaching assistant while she continues her studies. We are also creating scholarships for humans who wish to specialize in interspecies relations. The demonstration ended with representatives from dozens of species approaching Jiwoo and Vraltek, asking questions, requesting information, expressing interest in learning more. Later that evening, Jiwoo stood on the observation deck looking out at the stars. The cubs were with her, as always. They had grown so much, but they still sought her touch, still made those happy rumbling sounds when she scratched behind their horns. Vraltek joined her, his massive presence somehow comforting now rather than intimidating. "You changed my life, human Jiwoo," he said quietly. "I thought I knew everything about raising Velkari cubs. I thought our ways were the only ways. But you showed me that strength comes in many forms." "You changed too," Jiwoo said. "You were willing to learn. That takes more courage than people realize." "I lost siblings because our ways were too harsh," Vraltek said. "I do not want that for future generations. If your methods can save even one cub who would have been lost under the old system, then everything we have done is worthwhile." One of the cubs nuzzled Jiwoo's hand. She smiled and stroked its head. "I just played catch with them," she said. "I saw they were sad and wanted to help. I never meant to start anything big." "That is exactly why it worked," Vraltek replied. "You did not think about politics or tradition or what was proper. You saw need and responded with kindness. Sometimes the most profound changes begin with the simplest actions." Taemin and Dr. Bora joined them on the observation deck. Behind them came Ambassador Haewon and several other officials who had become friends over the past months. They stood together, watching the stars, representatives of different species united by a common goal. They talked about the future, about programs they would create, about young ones who would benefit from these new approaches. The cubs settled down in a pile, their breathing synchronized, completely content. Jiwoo thought about how far they had all come. 6 months ago, she was a frightened first-year student who just wanted to make some lonely cubs feel better. Now she was part of something that would reshape how species across the galaxy related to each other. Humanity had finally found its place in the galactic community, not as warriors or technological innovators, but as something equally important. Bridge builders, connection makers, the species that could see past surface differences to the emotional core that all sentient beings shared. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders, but perhaps the greatest wonder was the simple truth that Jiwoo had demonstrated. That kindness transcends species, that love is a universal language, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is offer your hand in friendship to someone completely different from yourself. One of the cubs made a soft chirping sound in its sleep. Jiwoo smiled and rested her hand on its head. It had all started with a game of catch, and it would ripple through the galaxy for generations to come, because that was what humanity did best. They found ways to connect. They built bridges where others saw only walls. They looked at predators and saw friends waiting to happen.